Welcome to ConnectU. My name is Tyler Henry, head strength and conditioning coach with Momentum Sports. And today I have Genevieve Humphrey, currently an assistant strength and conditioning coach with Georgia Southern University. G, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Why don't we go ahead and just start it off with a brief introductory. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got where you got.
Sure, yeah. Well, I go by Coach G. I'm here at Georgia Southern working with football, specifically working with return to play and a lot of specificities with yoga, recovery, mobility, stuff like that. I got into strength and conditioning specifically at the collegiate level back in 2019 at University of Pacific. I was working with Olympic sports and women's basketball. I got the opportunity to go to University of Tennessee as an intern with football back in 2021. Did that for about 2 years, contracted as a yoga instructor for my second year. Did a tiny stint in the military. I went to the Air Force for about 6 months, missed college football, and then found my way over here to Georgia Southern, working with the football team here.
Awesome. And G, one of the things that I always found really interesting with you in the brief time that we overlapped here at Tennessee was your interest in yoga and more specifically, really just the idea of recovery. Maybe we could start off by just talking a little bit about what you think the role of recovery is in training.
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest correlation that I saw was in sport, there is all this work that you're doing. You're playing your sport on the field or on the court. You're in the weight room. You're lifting. You're doing sprint work. You're doing tempo work, conditioning work, but no one really talks about how you prepare yourself for that work. As a young athlete, I got injured really early, and I found my way into yoga, unbeknownst to me, by recovery mechanisms, where it was an outlet that taught me how to get back into my body, but learn how to listen to it. From that, I learned how yoga can be applied to sport, but specifically how yoga taught me how to put the emphasis on recovering for the sake of being able to perform at your best. And I think the biggest thing it taught me was learning how to pay attention to what your body needs in order for it to turn around and do everything it needs to the next day or a couple hours later. The mantra I've now kind of adopted because of my time in learning about this is you can only work as well as you perform. So create a routine for you to recover so that way you can perform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and someone who's been in the collegiate sector for a little while now and been around strength conditioning for some time, it's pretty crazy how a lot of times with strength conditioning coaches, people who are professionals in this field, really miss the mark when it comes to this concept of recovery. And I think a lot of our athletes tend to miss it because of the leadership that's in place. And I know certainly in football culture, more seems to be more often. So
Agreed.
let's dive into that a little bit. What do you think are some of the barriers that people or athletes that you're seeing typically face when it comes to recovery? What are the things that are kind of holding people back in recovery?
Yeah. The two biggest things that I see is a combination of time management or lack thereof, and misinformation or just lack of understanding of the importance of it. A lot of times when I take the time to say, hey, what are you doing for your recovery? Hey, what are you doing to recover after a lift session or after practice? You guys are like, oh, I jumped in the cold tub, or I got some treatment on my knee. I'm like, okay, but have you eaten? Okay, but how many hours are you sleeping? Okay, but have you been hydrating throughout the whole day? Like, people, athletes specifically, don't really have an understanding of, well, what is recovery actually? And what are the big mechanisms that my body needs to optimally recover? And then how do I implement that into the rest of my day? Because in college, I mean, yeah, they're playing the sport and they have all of these obligations and requirements to get to, but also they're students and also they're teenagers and young adults. And so it's number one, what do I need to do? What am I even supposed to be focusing on? Number two, how am I going to manage all of those things? Because I only have 24 hours in a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So since many people are missing this and they're all trying to figure this out, I think there's probably even a lot of coaches who might be listening to this and wondering, okay, if I'm doing too much, then how much is enough? How do I figure that out? What's the tool that I can use to better understand or assess the levels of recovery so I can better prescribe training? Or maybe I'm an athlete and I'm trying to do more, I'm trying to do extra.
Mhm.
What are
I
these ways that you might go about that?
one a conversation that we have a lot of the times with our athletes is understanding that too much work can be damaging. Guys going out to get extra reps, or they finish practice, they finish their lift, then they're going to go out and run routes and catch balls, and then wake up at 5 or 6 or 7 the next morning to go practice. And um, it's understanding that in order for the body to adapt, you actually, for one thing, you don't need as much stimulus as you think you need, which is like this idea of like overstimulating the body when you're not considering the rest factor, because your body's not going to adapt if you haven't allowed it the time to rest in order for it to put those mechanisms into play to adapt, right? um, my biggest argument is always sleep. People are there's that you'll sleep when you're dead talk or whatever. But a lot of the time, like, an athlete needs like 8, 9, 10 plus hours of sleep, because all the damage that they're doing to their body, all that repair, the major repair, is going to happen when they're asleep at night. I think the biggest thing is having conversations with coaches and with athletes. Sometimes you got to pull out the research for coaches. Sometimes you got to find the articles that show, hey, you only need X number of reps to get adaptation in the body. And then in addition to that, you now need these mechanisms of recovery in place so that the adaptation actually happens. Let's like throw an arbitrary example. Okay, you actually only need, let's say, 300 yards of sprints to get adapted to a sprint mechanism. But the coach thinks, well, you actually need like 10,000, that was a large number, 100,000, or just like 1,000 yards, right? When in actuality, what you need is 300 yards and then 10 to 12 hours of sleep and X number of calories, breaking that down into carbs, proteins, fats, whatever, and X amount of hydration. And then if you're someone who has aches and pains, your knees hurt, whatever, maybe you need a couple of like mobilizers or activations or something like that. But a lot of the time it's this balance of, yes, I got my reps in, but now I need to go set my body up for success so that those reps that I just did are going to be like applied into my body. Typically that is through sleep, eat, hydrate.
Hmm. The power of education is what I hear when I hear you tell me that. Yeah, that's awesome. So let's change gears a little bit. Something that you've alluded to somewhat throughout the discussion so far has just been this idea of, structuring out a routine when it comes to what works well for you. What does that look like? And how would you go about building something like that, for proper recovery and restoration?
Mm-hmm. It's my favorite thing to sit down with one of my athletes for like 2 hours and go over a schedule. But a lot of the time it is sitting down with someone one on one and talking to them about what their week looks like. Okay, what are the obligations? When is your practice? When are your lifts? When are your classes? Do you work? When are your hours for working? Um, and then in between those is how much time do you need to get from point A to point B? How much like prep time do you need to get yourself ready for those activities? And then from there, it's filling in the gaps. A lot of the time, I get questions about, well, I need to do homework and I can't get to bed until 11 or 12 or something like that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with that. But can we take a nap somewhere in the day? Where can you like catch up on some of your sleep within the week? Um, and really it's like within a 24-hour span, where can you get these hours? You can't get 8 straight hours, but maybe you can go home for an hour and a half and take a nap, and then maybe later in the evening between your lift and your extra reps that you're going to take with your teammates, you can get a 30-minute nap, not even at home, literally in the locker room. The other big thing is meals. A lot of the guys that we have here, they don't cook, and but we have access to clean eat. So we have these prepackaged frozen meals that they can have. And the first thing out of my mouth is like, are you at least getting 3 meals in a day? Do you eat breakfast? And if not, why not? where can we start to implement these meals? You don't have time to get a meal in, pack a bag full of snacks. Like, you don't have time, grab 2 extra meals so that way when you do get home, you can just kind of like calorie load. Um, I think it's giving them the understanding that there's a lot more cans than there are can'ts. And so it's literally sitting there and compromising with them, like, where can we fill these holes that we need filled so that we can be successful, especially guys who are on, scout team, or that, or second string, that really want to be first string, or the guys who like want to go pro. You got to figure this shit out. Excuse me, you have to figure this out now. um because it matters. It all matters, especially in terms of sleeping and eating, and the risk of injury that can like easily be affected if you aren't getting that sleep and aren't getting that nutrition. You talk to them about that, and you take the time to sit and organize out a calendar. That's the best way that I've found to do it. And then putting it on them. Okay, here is what your day is going to look like. Here's when you have to pack extra meals. Here's when you have to pack extra snacks. Here's when you have to meal prep or something. Now go do it and hold them accountable to it. Check in with them. Did you get your extra smoothie? Did you take your nap today? If not, why not? Do you want to be great? Then you have to go do it. I think it's a lot of that. Show them how to do it and then hold them accountable to it.
That's huge. Yeah, that's huge. And I think really like in today's age, as we get more and more resources and information about training, sport, all these things that people can now constantly tap into, and you see all this specialization in sport now because of it. Um, I think a lot of times like everybody looks for like the magic approach, like the magic training system, the magic supplement, the magic diet, whatever it might be. And to your point, it's just like what I hear when you talk about that is like taking ultimate responsibility for what happens outside of that 1 or 2 hours that you spend training, and developing a system for the accountability for the 23 or 24 hours of your day that you have, that's outside of just being inside the weight room or on the field doing what you do. Uh, so I think you make a really great point about that. And I spend a lot of time in where I work at, constantly educating guys on the exact same thing, taking great responsibility. It's so easy as a college athlete to have your hand held through training and let it slip through the cracks the minute you leave the facility. So I thought that was well put. Um, let's talk about one more thing. So you have this great specialty in yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about how yoga fits into your annual plan when it comes to just making this thing fit off season versus in season. Does it look different? How do you go about that? And where does it fit in this whole restoration thing?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I always find that yoga fits into recovery because it's just movement. All it is movement and body awareness. Are you paying attention? Um, it's easy to fit it in for, on, or excuse me, in season, or off season, when we're drilling the guys and they just need like a little bit of like motion is lotion, just a little bit of recovery. um but when I started my own practice, the practice that kind of like healed my body was more, it was faster paced. It was hot, and it loosened up my joints because it made me go into positions and hold positions that I didn't want to go to, didn't know that I could go there. Um, I've come to find that it's in probably the winter and the beginning of summer is like the best way to do more like fast paced yoga, where you're just one trying to flush the body out, but you're more so trying to do it in like in a mobilizing way, in the sense of I'm trying to get to where my end ranges are weak, where my ranges of motions are not as accessible, or they are weaker, and it's uncomfortable to get there, but like I'm not being taxed by practice, I'm not being taxed by game, so I can add that little extra on top. It's when you start getting into spring ball, it's when you start getting into season, that you have to rear everything back that you can. And that's where I kind of tap on to like the low and slow yoga. My favorite thing to teach guys about yoga, because I say I teach yoga and they're like, I can't touch my toes, I can't do yoga. It's not about that. It's Are you paying attention to your breath? Are you breathing? And are you paying attention to your body? What your body can do, are you paying attention to? What your body can't do, are you paying attention to it? All it is body awareness, and then intentionally trying to slow your breath down, because as strength coaches who preach recovery, you're constantly trying to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system where and when you can't, that rest and restore where and when you can. And when you are actively trying to slow your breath down, you are activating your parasympathetic nervous system. Obviously, when you're doing faster yoga, it's like kind of tricking your body, like, hey, this is difficult, but also I'm still calm. Versus when I'm doing something that's like low, slow, something called yin or restorative yoga, where you're just on the ground and gravity is kind of doing your work for you, as well as like tapping into that nice slow breath. You're actively like triggering and turning on your recovery mechanisms. So I see it as one, another way for the guys to like actively turn on recovery in their body. But two, it's one of the moments where I can get them to calm down and they can feel it. They come up from a yoga session, they finish a yoga session, and they're like, wow, I feel so good. Wow, I felt so relaxed. It's very rare that you feel relaxed in season. Like, you're stressed, you're scared, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're hyped, like, but you're very rarely like, okay, everything is cool. In moments like that, that's where it's actually really important to tap into that, so you can actually shut your body down to some extent, so that when you ramp it back up again, it's ready to do that. It all goes hand in hand with the same intention for why you want to recover in the first place. It's just another tool to get the guys there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And that's a tool that not a lot of people in strength conditioning are utilizing. I think that's a really unique tool that you have. It's another reason that I'm really excited about, as we continue as momentum to reveal our ability to broadcast live sessions, and your ability to go ahead and lead classes, do yoga, continue to add value to athletes. I'm excited to see what that looks like going forward for you. I do also, before we wrap up, want to give people a chance to know where they can find you. I know you're not a humongous social media presence, but I do want to put you out there, obviously, as one of our newer trainers, available here on Sidekick. But social media wise, any handles that you use, or places that people can find you best?
I have one social media access. It's on Instagram. I'm at Coach G 2_23.
All right. Awesome. Well, Coach G, we appreciate your time. Thanks for making the time to chat with me today, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Somewhere in here, I'm going to stop recording. Welcome to ConnectU. My name is Tyler Henry, head strength and conditioning coach with Momentum Sports, and today I have Genevieve Humphrey, currently an assistant strength and conditioning coach with Georgia Southern University. G, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Why don't we go ahead and just start it off with a brief introductory. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got where you got.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I go by Coach G. I'm here at Georgia Southern working with football, specifically working with return to play and a lot of specificities with yoga, recovery, mobility, stuff like that. I got into strength and conditioning specifically at the collegiate level back in 2019 at University of Pacific. I was working with Olympic sports and women's basketball. I got the opportunity to go to University of Tennessee as an intern with football back in 2021. Did that for about 2 years, contracted as a yoga instructor for my second year. Did a tiny stint in the military. I went to the Air Force for about 6 months, missed college football, and then found my way over here to Georgia Southern, working with the football team here.
Awesome. And G, one of the things that I always found really interesting with you in the brief time that we overlapped here at Tennessee was your interest in yoga, and more specifically, really just the idea of recovery. Maybe we could start off by just talking a little bit about what you think the role of recovery is in training.
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest correlation that I saw was In sport, there is all this work that you're doing. You're playing your sport on the field or on the court. You're in the weight room. You're lifting. You're doing sprint work. You're doing tempo work, conditioning work, but no one really talks about how you prepare yourself for that work. As a young athlete, I got injured really early, and I found my way into yoga, unbeknownst to me, by recovery mechanisms, where it was an outlet that taught me how to get back into my body, but learn how to listen to it. From that, I learned how yoga can be applied to sport, but specifically how yoga taught me how to put the emphasis on recovering for the sake of being able to perform at your best. And I think the biggest thing it taught me was learning how to pay attention to what your body needs in order for it to turn around and do everything it needs to the next day or a couple hours later. The mantra I've now kind of adopted because of my time in learning about this is you can only work as well as you perform. So create a routine for you to recover so that way you can perform.
Hmm. Yeah, and someone who's been in the collegiate sector for a little while now and been around strength conditioning for some time, it's pretty crazy how a lot of times with strength conditioning coaches, people who are professionals in this field, really miss the mark when it comes